guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, HOA banned my emotional support dog, I sued them and won. Never mess with a veteran. TLDR. I am a veteran that has an emotional support dog for mental health. The HOA recently enforced a no-pet rule in the neighborhood, and I was told to get rid of my dog or move. I didn't do either and started getting crazy fines in the mail every single day for him. I showed them not to mess with a veteran when I took them to court and sued them for harassment and trying to get rid of a dog that I had a prescription from my doctor for. I won easily and caused such a stir that the new head had to step down and let someone else take control. Soon the entire rule was taken away and I was able to live in peace again with my dog helping keep me stable. Now I might look like an old man that can be messed with, but as a United States Marine veteran I would like to tell anybody that thinks that can mess with me to think again. To understand the story, you should know that from my time in the services and other personal matters my doctor recommended that I get an emotional support animal. I got a cute little dog that helps a lot with the depression and anxiety. After a heart attack and stroke I'm not the most mobile person in the world, but having my little buddy helps me get out of the house and not just being stuck inside. Basically, he is the best thing that has ever happened to me, and at the time of the story I've had him for about 7 years. Now I knew that I was living in an HOA but never really bothered looking that much into the rules. As far as I knew the whole thing was about keeping your property neat and stuff like that, which mine was. Apparently though there was a rule about no pets that wasn't actually being enforced. It was pretty serious too, stating that there could be no dogs, cats, birds, fish, reptiles, rodents, turtles, etc. I have no idea who wrote this thing and what their issue against our fellow creatures were. Then a new head of the HOA stepped up and decided he was going to start enforcing the rules against no pets even though plenty lived in the neighborhood. Luckily most indoor pets like fish and lizards couldn't really be monitored because well they just wouldn't let the HOA go into their home. Dogs though got the biggest crackdown because it was obvious who had a dog and all of us were sent letters home saying we either needed to get rid of the animal or relocate. There was no way in hell I was going to move out of my home because of this rule. There was also no way I was going to get rid of my dog just because the head of the HOA decided this horrible rule was a good idea. Now I don't know about the other people that had dogs in the neighborhood, but I felt like I should have been allowed to keep my dog. Remember, he is an emotional support dog, and my doctor was the one telling me that I needed him. He was basically a prescription from my doctor, so they couldn't just tell me to get rid of him. For the point of this I really am going to put aside that the whole thought of telling people to get rid of their companions is just the worst thing ever and focus on what happened first between me and them. I flat out refused to do anything about it and got letters saying that I was getting daily fines until I got rid of the dog or moved. These fines were insane by the way, like $300 a day for breaking this stupid rule. I realized that this wasn't going away and decided I was just going to sue them for trying to make me get rid of the dog. I wasn't going in alone though, no sir. I made sure that other veterans and military families to let them know exactly what I was going through and invited them to come and show their support. If anyone could come close to the way I was feeling that made me get the dog, it would be that group of people. On the day of the trial, I went in and found that I had a huge amount of not only fellow military supporting me, but even some of my neighbors that knew me and my connection to the dog. The trial was pretty boring with the HOA explaining their rules and me seeing the new head of the HOA for the first time. His lawyer went on and on that it didn't matter if the rule was never enforced before, it was never challenged or overturned. He also tried to tell me that my dog wasn't able to be an emotional support dog, which was just flat out wrong. I showed them a letter from my doctor that I asked him to write verifying that living without the dog would cause an adverse effect on my mental health. Basically, since the case was obviously really clear-cut, I won without a problem and got to keep my dog. The story doesn't end there though, like you might think. The people that came and supported me still didn't like what the HOA head was doing, and they called for his head basically. They badmouthed him to the media, and he was labeled as discriminating against veterans and not caring about the service members. Probably a little extreme, but media tends to crack things up to 10 these days. He basically got so much crap from everyone that he willingly stepped down and someone new was appointed to lead the HOA. The first thing that they did was get rid of the rule about having pets because they knew it was just going to get them in a lot of trouble. Maybe people have dogs for emotional support or even services. Others could make an argument that forcing someone to separate from an animal that they made an attachment with is just plain cruel and could sue the HOA for suffering. I didn't want to get any money or anything out of them, I just wanted them to leave me alone about my little buddy. I don't recall if the fines were officially taken away by the judge since my memory isn't what it used to be. Either way, I never paid them, and nobody ever asked me about them again. For a while at the park, me and my dog were being treated almost like celebrities, with everyone knowing what went down and that I was the one that basically helped the rule get taken away. Like I said in the beginning though, it really wasn't about getting the rule overturned for me. It was just about me keeping the dog that I really need in order to survive day to day. Even as I type this out on the computer now, my little buddy is sitting in my lap and just relaxing. It might not seem like he is doing much to most people, but without him I probably wouldn't be able to function day to day. He is the thing that helps me get up in the morning and keep myself moving throughout the day. I might look like an old man walking around with a tiny little dog, but that doesn't mean you can get away with pushing me around. One thing about Marines is that we carry it with us for the rest of our lives, so even if I haven't served in almost 50 years doesn't mean that you can push me around. Veterans are just as tough as the young ones fighting today, and anyone trying to mess with me is going to feel that wrath. The next story is titled, "One Large Animal Per Acre." TLDR. We had 2 pet cows in our acre pasture. City requirement was 1 acre per large animal. After constant threats to turn us in by a neighbor, one was moved to the front yard for just long enough for the neighbor to back down. The story I just read about the dead horse reminded me of this story from my childhood that also involved a dead horse. Although I'll admit the part about the horse comes before the MC, but I'm including it because it's funny. When I was 5 years old, we moved to a house that was in a normal neighborhood with lots of houses and mostly pretty normal-sized yards, but on the larger side. This particular house had an acre pasture behind it, and there was a horse that the previous owners sold with the house. We had that horse for a couple of years, which my dad loved. He taught my brothers and me how to ride. Then one Labor Day the horse died. Well, the dead wagon won't come pick up a dead horse on a holiday, and you can't just leave it in your pasture when you live in a neighborhood with lots of houses and people around. My uncle owned a service station and a wrecker truck, so he and my dad somehow loaded the horse onto the wrecker truck and covered it with the pool cover and drove it to wherever you take dead horses a couple hours away. They got a lot of strange looks from people wondering what was under the pool cover. So now we had a pasture with no horse, and my dad had always wanted cows, so he bought 2 cows to keep as pets. Our next door neighbor was an older couple, and for some reason the guy didn't really like us. You're technically only allowed 1 large animal per acre, so 2 cows were breaking the rules, but they weren't bothering literally anyone, so no one cared except the neighbor that didn't like us. He would constantly threaten to turn us in. The thing is, our front yard was also an acre. It had a fence, but it was mostly decorative, just 2 posts with the top one maybe 4 feet high and no gate across the driveway. But after one too many threats from the neighbor, my dad told him it's all good, we'll just move one of the cows to the front yard. He brought one to the front and let it graze a little bit, and that was enough for neighbor guy to back down and never complain about Mindy and Wendy again. I don't know what happened later, my dad probably does, but at some point, the guy turned a corner and then loved us. He talked to us all the time and would take pictures of us playing for the sole purpose of giving them to my parents because they were nice neighbors. I'm sure that didn't happen until we got rid of the cows and got another horse. The cows did get out once and made their way to the corner in front of a hospital on the busiest street in town. We got them back and they were fine, but it was too much trouble just to have pet cows. The next story is titled, "Neighbor Wanted the Fence Fix, We Just Removed the Fence." TLDR. Wind damage friend's fence, friend was going to fix it in the spring. Backyard neighbor wanted it fixed now and called the city. Friend just removed fence instead, and neighbor has no fence on their backside of yard. This happens to my friend a couple months ago. Him and his wife just moved into their first house about 6 months ago. Then a strong windstorm came through and damaged their fence. And by damage their fence I mean the fence was now leaning slightly, leaning about 70 degrees. Because home insurance won't fix the fence plus it being winter. My friend and his wife were going to wait until spring to hire someone to fix or replace their fence. Well, their backyard neighbor did not like that. The backyard neighbor wanted the fence fix as soon as possible. When the neighbor found out they were going to wait until spring, the neighbor called the city and complained that their fence was out of code. When the city inspector came out to inspect their fence, it was in fact out of code and needed to be corrected. Now the reason the neighbor was so fixated on the fence being replaced is because the neighbor has a pool in their yard and need to have a fence around their pool for safety. Well, my friend and his wife, now pissed off at their neighbor, decided to only remove the fence and not replace it. This allows them to be in city code, and now when the spring hits, the neighbor is going to need to build a fence on their back side of their yard if they want to fill up their pool for the summer. If the neighbor would have just been nice and not called the city like a Karen, my friend would have built the fence up in the spring. Now problem. The next story is titled, "My neighbor wanted me to use a garden tool, so I obliged." So, this happened about 2 years ago. I should also mention that I am tatted up and have weird hair, and neighbor is ultra religious and extra conservative. It's a beautiful fall day and I take the opportunity to do some gardening to get my plants ready for winter. I live in Zone 4B. For those who don't know about gardening zones, look it up, it's very interesting and informative. I realize my pruning shears are rusted shut because silly me left them out in the elements. So, I go and grab a kitchen knife that I never use and start chopping away at my hostess. My neighbor, let's call her Ms. Meanie, sees me working and decides to come and have a chat. She informs me that the knife I'm using, a 12 inches thin kitchen knife, is very threatening and dangerous looking, and if I don't stop using it, she's going to call the cops. I reassure her that I'm only using it to prune my plants. Ms. Meanie decides that me chopping up dead hosta leaves equals terroristic threats and goes on and calls the cops. They show up. I explain the situation, they laugh and tell me that maybe to ease the tension I should probably get a new pruning tool. Enter malicious compliance. I go to the local hardware store and in the garden center find the biggest and worst machete they can legally sell. It's 24 inches long and about 5 inches tall. Don't hate on my shitty measurement description, just envision a huge machete. I leave feeling confident I won't anger anyone anymore. So, I start chopping away with my new garden friend, and Ms. Meanie is appalled at what she is seeing. A massacre of dead growth and tree limbs lay at my feet. She yells from her window in a scared voice, "You're going to jail," before she calls the cops. Again, the cops show up and the same officer arrives laughing even harder than before. He says I am, technically using a garden tool, and no threat can be found. She moved out shortly after, and now I can use my baby. I call her Ma Che Te, whenever I need and don't have to deal with the cops. Edit. The neighbor in question was in her late 50s and I don't believe her behavior was due to mental illness. I am in the US. I used to do her mowing and snowblowing for free until she demanded I do more gardening also for free. When I quoted her a price she was outraged, called me a whore, and that was that. The cops did try to talk to her, but she refused to answer the door. She calls the cops on people all the time so they kind of know her. Her skin color should not be part of the conversation because it is not an important part of the story. The last story is titled, "You Don't Want the Climbing Plants?" Sure thing. This happened to my mom. My parents live in a big house with an amazing garden. My mom is an agri-engineer and really cares about her plants. When we moved there it was almost a desert and she put a lot of effort to make plants grow beautifully. The house has a direct entrance to the garden on the left part, so there's a wall like 13 meters tall, then it goes down to 5 meters and then again up to 8 meters. 10 years ago my mom talked to the neighbor if there was no problem with them setting a wiring where the wall is 5 meters tall so my mom could make climbing plants grow. The neighbor was really happy with the idea because a green wall would make the view more appealing, and it will also give the two houses more privacy. So, she put a 3 meters tall wiring, some ampelopsis and also 2 different types of climbing jasmines. The neighbor was delighted that in summer he could enjoy the sweet fragrance of the flowers. Win-win for both. Well, the neighbor died, and his son sold the house, and the new owner built a 3 floors apartment complex there. After some months the new neighbor started complaining with my mom about the climbing plants. He wanted her to cut them off. Remember the wall's height? Cutting the green wall off with a 3-floor building next to them meant total privacy invasion. The harassment to get rid of the plants became unbearable. God protects this man because nobody wants to mess with my mom, especially when it comes to her plants. So, my mom cut all the plants off, talked to an architect, talked to the municipality to get the permission and built a wall. He was so pissed, and when he confronted my mom, she showed him the permission and told him, "I cut them off like you asked for. Now you're not going to have problems with the plants anymore." Of course, she made the plants grow again and she has her beautiful green wall again. And the neighbor has now a beautiful concrete monster in front of the windows. Then we learned that the building wasn't authorized by the municipality, so an 8 meters wall doesn't sound that bad after all. Thanks for listening.